In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 204 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is There is Always Hope. Our quote of the day comes to us from Charles A. Beard. When it's dark enough, you can see the stars. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode. Although I only met our guest recently, he and I immediately connected on many levels. His no-quit story is absolutely incredible, and after receiving a 65-year prison sentence, Damon West could have easily given up and given in, but he didn't. Today, he has not only changed his life, but he is paying it forward through his work and trying to be useful for others every single day. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Damon, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Hey, man, thanks for having me, Chris. I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you for making my life useful today. That's all I ask in life, is to be useful.
I appreciate it. And the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I wake up every day ready to bring it, brother. Let's go.
Awesome. So your no-quit story, as I told you before, is amazing, but I was hoping we could possibly jump to the point where you were sentenced to 65 years in jail, and if you could briefly touch upon how that came about, but more importantly, how you're able to continue to battle and keep your no-quit attitude while you were in jail.
Yeah, so here's the deal, man. So I was a guy that had everything going for him in life. I played college football, played quarterback in college. I worked on Wall Street. I worked for a guy running for president. I worked in United States Congress. But it was when I was working at his job as a stockbroker in 2004, I got hooked on meth. And it took me no time to give up everything for that drug. As an addict, I freely gave everything away. And so I'm homeless and I'm living with a bunch of other meth addicts in different dope houses. And we start breaking into people's cars and storage units. And then eventually we start breaking into people's homes. And Chris, home burglaries are a big deal. This is what I did is not something small. And I know that I hurt a lot of people. I have a lot of victims out there. And, we stole something from these people. We didn't just steal their property. We took a lot of property. But we stole these people's sense of security, and that's a big violation. So, as such, in 2008, July 30th, 2008, to be exact, the Dallas SWAT team caught up with me and took me down in this little apartment I was living in, this little dope house. And they took me to jail, and I spent 10 months in jail waiting for my day in court. When I got to court in May of 2019, I didn't get 1 day in court. I got 6 days in court, which is a long criminal trial for crimes that are non-aggravated, crimes where no one's physically hurt. And at the end of 6 days, the jury of my peers was gone deliberating for 10 minutes. Chris, I don't know how much Law and Order you watch, but if a jury's gone for 10 minutes, brother, they smoked you. And when I came back in the courtroom, the judge gavelled it in and basically said, Damon Joseph West, you are hereby sentenced to 65 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And Chris, 65 years, man, that's a life sentence, man. This is 60 and above is life. That's what Texas considers to be life. A jury gave me life on my first felony conviction ever for a bunch of meth-related property crimes. And they were mad at me, and rightly so. And right after that trial, they threw me in this little room on the side of the courtroom, and my parents were given one last visit with me. And that's my mom and dad came in there. And my dad was a sports writer for 50 years. He's dealt with a lot of stuff in life, but my mom, she's a nurse. So she's used to trauma. She does all the talking. And she said, baby, debts in life demand to be paid. She said, you just got hit with one hell of a bill from the state of Texas. But she said, you did the things they said you did, Damon. So you have to pay that debt to society. She said, but you owe your father and I a debt too. She said, we gave you all the love and opportunity and support to be anything you want to be in this life. We raised you in a giant melting pot of a city called Port Arthur, Texas. And we gave you a great moral compass, which you chose to not use. So here's the debt you're going to pay to your father and I. She said, when you go to prison, you'll get on God's back like I told you to, just like in Footprints in the Sand. And she said, you will not get in one of these white hate groups because you're scared because you're the minority in there. She said, that's not going to work, Damon. You're not going to get one of these Aryan Brotherhood type gangs. She said, you're not going to get a bunch of tattoos. She said, as a matter of fact, you're not getting any tattoos while you're in prison. And this is the part of the story when I'm in front of kids, in front of college athletes and showing my arms, man. I didn't get any tattoos the whole time I was there, Chris. I mean, I was there almost a decade. And everybody wants a tattoo inside that place. But I tell them all the time, Chris, man, my mom said no. So I did. So my mom said, here's the deal, Damon. No gangs, no tattoos. You get on God's back. She said, you come back as the man we raised or don't you come back at all. Tough love from mom. And so I'm in county jail. And they take me back to the pod. And I start asking around everybody there, man, who I can, who's been to prison before. Hey, how am I going to survive this? And every single man, Chris, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, is telling me the same thing, man. Wes, you're 33 years old. You're young enough for gang recruiting age. Just get into a gang, make your life easy. And they're telling me you're going to the worst part of the Texas prison system where everybody on your pod has a life sentence. You're on the life sentence building, bro. Get into a gang. But there was this one guy, Chris, this old black guy named Jackson. I called him Mr. Jackson out of respect. And Mr. Jackson, he had been to prison 4 or 5 times. He was in Dallas County Jail on a parole violation. And it's in his 60s. And so he pulled me aside. He pulled me aside every day. Real positive guy. One of those positive guys we like to talk about when we're talking about positivity. And he said, hey, Wes, I've been watching how you're dealing with these knuckleheads, these dummies. How do you feel about their advice they're giving you? And I told Mr. Jackson, frankly, hey, look, I don't think it's going to work out well for me. He said, don't listen to him. He said, you don't have to get into a gang. He said, but your life's going to be harder initially because of that. He said, what you need to know about prison, it's all about race. And race runs the institution, and it's disgusting. He said, so that means the white gang get the first dibs on you. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Aryan Circle, the White Knights, the Woods. He said, you got to fight all those guys off. He said, and if you survive their onslaught and you don't give in to their ideology of hate out of fear, then you will have to fight all the black gangs because they're going to send the black gangs after you. He said the Crips, the Bloods, the gangster disciples, man, Dingo Warriors. He's naming all the black prison gangs off. He said, you're going to fight all those guys. He said, but if you survive all that, you earn the right to walk alone. He said, the strongest man in prison always walks alone. And then he told me what's a lesson in life, Chris. He said, you don't have to win all your fights, West, but you have to fight all your fights. And that's important to remember in life because, we're going to lose battles sometimes. But he's telling me, he's reassuring me that as long as I get up and fight, I'll be okay. And that's good. That takes a lot of pressure off in life whenever you realize you don't have to win everything, but you got to get out there and try. Then he gives me an analogy, Chris. He says, West, I want you to imagine prison as like a pot of boiling water. He said, anything we put in that pot of boiling water is going to be changed by the heat and the pressure inside that pot. He said, there are 3 things we're going to put in this pot of boiling water we call prison and watch how they change. A carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. Now, Chris, this story, when I tell it everywhere I go, this has been a thing that's caught fire all over the country with college athletic programs, with corporations, with schools, with junior highs, high schools, church groups, all over, because this message is applicable to every single group, organization, or team. So he says, West, we're going to take that pot of boiling water we call prison. Let's put that carrot in there first. He said, what happens to a carrot when you put it in boiling water? And I told him, I said, it turns soft. He said, that's right. He said, the carrot goes into prison hard, but prison changes that carrot quick, turns him soft. He said, the carrot got beat, he got robbed, he got raped, and he may have gotten killed. He said, you do not want to be the carrot in prison. He said, what about the egg? And I said, well, Mr. Jackson, if you boil an egg, it turns hard, like a hard-boiled egg, right? He said, yeah, that's right, Wes. He said the egg had that hard outer shell, which protected it physically. Unlike the carrot didn't have an outer shell, so the egg is going to be fine physically. But inside, the egg has turned hard. His heart has turned hard. And when his heart turns hard, he is incapable of giving or receiving love. The egg has become institutionalized. He said, if you become the egg, stay in prison, because you'll keep going back the rest of your life. But more importantly, you won't be someone your parents recognize. He said, what about the coffee bean, West? And Chris, I had no idea, man. He stumped me. And Jackson kind of laughed. Mr. Jackson kind of laughed. He said, for a college boy, you're not too smart, West. He said, if you put a coffee bean into a pot of boiling water, he said, now you got to change the name of the water to coffee. He said the coffee bean, the smallest of these three things, small like you, had the power to change the entire atmosphere inside that pot. He said, if you're going to survive prison and keep that promise you made to your parents and the promise you made to God and to yourself, you're going to have to be like that coffee bean. He said, everybody in life puts out energy, negative or positive. He said, whatever kind of energy you put out, you get back. That's the law of attraction. He said, if you walk around with a frown on your face and a scowl all the time, and you're negative, he said, you're going to attract the same kind of inmate. And that can be a deadly game. He said, but West, if you walk around with a smile on your face and you let those dudes know they're not getting to you no matter what they do, he said, you will change prison from the inside out. And the atmosphere around you will change. He said, the best part about it is the other coffee beans in prison will find you because of your energy. And the last thing Mr. Jackson said to me was, go out there and go be that coffee bean, West. So that was basically what happened right after my sentencing and the time between when I'm getting ready to go to prison. And it was like a secret I had in my pocket, Chris. And it gave me reassurance where I needed a lot at that point. I needed something to pick me up because I was sinking, Chris. I was really sinking down into a hole of despair. I'm getting ready to go to prison for what I think is the rest of my life on the hardest part of the Texas prison system, the life sentence building. But this guy, this Mr. Jackson, tells me it's going to be okay because I have some control over the situation.
I appreciate you sharing the story, and I think it's remarkable of where you are today and how you've done that. And I think the simplicity in which you share that story is incredible, because the reality is that we all go through different things in life, and I could never tell you that I know what you're going through, but the story that Mr. Jackson told you about the carrot, the egg, and the coffee bean is just something that I think, like you said, it's transferable in all areas of life. So got to ask you a question we always ask everybody, Damon, is if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what would that word be?
Useful. This question, Chris, was asked to me in a different way one time before, and it was whenever they were on the unit interviewing me for parole. And I came up for parole at 7 years into my prison sentence, and it's my first time up for parole on my life sentence because my crimes, no one was physically hurt. I had a chance to make parole early. And the parole officer interviewing me, she was telling me, she's like, I don't see a lot of people come through here like you, Mr. West. You've got a lot going for you, tremendous amount of positive stuff in your background. She said, let me ask you something. If you could be remembered for being anything in this life, give it to me in just one word, go. And because I have a program of recovery, Chris, because I've got a conscious contact with my higher power, which I call God, because I have that, I was able to tell her just right off the bat, useful. I just want to be useful again, ma'am. And I can be useful in prison or I can be useful out of prison. But wherever I go, I'm going to be useful.
That's an incredible answer to such a simple question. And I think it definitely depicts who you are today, because I've followed you for the last few days, and I actually was introduced to you through the Positive Summit that John Gordon is holding online, and I absolutely love your story. And wanted to ask you, you talked about briefly the present, past, and the future. I wanted to just ask you if you wouldn't mind just briefly touching on that for a minute.
Yeah, this is an important thing for everybody to remember, and it's an important thing for me to remember. And it's almost like I have to remind myself of it daily, is that, your past doesn't define you, Chris. And if my past defined me, then I wouldn't be working where I work. I won't work for one of the most prestigious law firms in Texas. I have a wonderful family now with my girlfriend named Kendall and her daughter named Clara, and Kendall's family loves me. My family, we've rekindled our relationships, and I get to go all over the country and share a message of positivity, and I get to be a warning to others of what not to do. And that's important with kids, especially with the dangers of drugs and the consequences of bad decisions. So I get to use my message. I get to be used basically for a positive way for the universe. And I think that's one of the best things in the world. But it's proof that your past does not define you. Your past wins don't define you, Chris. Your past losses don't define you. All that's in the past. That's part of the permanent public record. But your past is your lesson, and we can learn from our past, and we're better off when we do learn from our past too, so we don't have to repeat the mistakes of our past. I tell people all the time about fighting in prison. The first couple of months I was there, I fought for my life almost on a daily basis, and I lost most of those fights, Chris. Physically lost most of those fights. I got beat up a lot, but I got up and fought every day, so that means I won, especially by Mr. Jackson's standards, because you don't have to win all your fights, but you have to fight all your fights. And just by showing up sometimes is a victory in and of itself. And so your past doesn't define you. And your present, your present is your lesson. Your past is your lesson. The present is a gift, man. The today is a gift. You have a chance to make history today. You have a chance to make someone's life better today. You have a chance to put back into the stream of life for another day. And man, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there because there's always going to be something you can do for other people. I say the same prayer every morning that I learned in prison. I learned how to pray when I was there because I got back in touch with God of my understanding. And so I talk to God every morning now, and I pray for two things, Chris. And I pray, God, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you. And man, let me recognize it when I see it because I don't want to miss that, And I don't pray for anything else, and that's important because today is a gift and you make the most of that. Not just a gift for you, but a gift for others, a chance for you to give others of yourself. But the future and the future's motivation, that's where it's really at, man. What drives you? What are your goals? What are your goals as an individual, as a member of a team, as a member of an organization, as a member of society? What are your goals? And if I can interject a couple of goals that I think would be a positive goal for everybody, a goal for everybody should be to be a better servant leader. And a servant leader is someone who gives of themselves. A servant leader is someone who helps other people achieve their goals in life. Because when we're helping others, we're really helping ourselves. So I tell people all the time, your past is your lesson, and the present is a gift, and the future, that's your motivation, Chris.
I think those three things are so inspirational because they're so easy to do in the sense of you can look at your past, you can look at your present, you can look at your future. And I loved how you touched on this, the servant leadership, which is, giving of yourself. And as before we went live, I was talking to you about the fact that we're on a pay it forward with positivity mission, that no quit living. And the whole reason why I love that term of pay it forward is because you're doing something for somebody else. But the reality is you feel that much better because it comes back to you tenfold. And I think you're obviously living it each and every day. So I commend you for that.
Man, thank you so much. And that's the thing. People will tell me all the time that, oh man, I'll never be able to pay you back. And I fire back off at them immediately, whether it's on Facebook Messenger, where they just find me or text or in person. Don't ever pay it back. Always pay it forward. You don't owe me anything, man. And people will tell me, man, God's going to bless you for the things you've done. And I'd always tell them, look at me. God already has blessed me. I'm not in prison anymore. I'm able to be used to go out and spread positivity in the world and help other people. And that's the best use of my life. And so I've been blessed. I've been paid back. And my mission, my hope is to do exactly what you're talking about. Your pay it forward thing that you're doing is great, man. You're putting a positive message on someone's windshield. You don't know the impact you're having on someone's life by doing that. I mean, because someone having a bad day gets your message and it changes their whole outlook for a day. And then they go out and positively affect other people. That's infectious, man. And it's such a great message. And like Mr. Jackson talked about, it's that positive energy that attracts other positive energy. So I think it's a great message. The servant leadership thing we talked about, we touched on it a little bit. I've learned in prison what the secret to life was, Chris. And the secret to life, a lot of people they'll write books about it. They'll have seminars you can go to. You can pay money to get someone's book or go to their seminar. But let me save your money. The secret to life is one sentence, and it's very simple. And I learned it in recovery, and I learned it by getting back in touch with, like I said, with God, my higher power. The secret to life is real simple. It's serving others and being humble. And that's where I talk about the servant leadership. Because when we're humble, when we're amenable to understanding that we are right sized, I think being humbled is being right sized. To know that our place in the universe is small. We're not the giant of our dreams, so we have to understand our place in the world and go out there and do it the best we can.
I love how you said that, is serving others and being humble. And I think I appreciate what you said about the positive notes, because that's the whole reason why we're doing it. Is we don't know the people whose cars we're putting on. I sure don't know the other ambassadors that I have throughout the country, which cars or people they're putting on. But the hope behind it is that somebody just has a better day. And somebody sees it and it lifts them up. And then maybe they're having an amazing day. Maybe they're having an okay day. But the reality is nobody here, none of our listeners, you included, myself included, can ever have too good of a day, in the sense where somebody else could say something really nice to you, even though you're having a good day, and you're going to say, you know what, I'm good, thanks, I don't need any more nice comments.
No, it's not possible, man. You can't have a good enough day. That's a very good point.
No, and it's one of the reasons why we do it. And so we'll touch on your book in a second, but I wanted to ask if there's anything that you're currently reading, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Man, so John Gordon got in touch with me back in the summer, and he calls me up, Chris, and he says, "Hey, Damon, it's John Gordon." And I'm like, "Wow, John Gordon, how do you know who I am?" Now, of course, I know who John is, man. John is a huge motivational speaker, one of the biggest of our time, and he's a best-selling author. And so I'm stunned that he's calling me. And so John's like, "Hey, Damon, it's John Gordon." And I was like, "John, how do you even know who I am?" He says, "Hey, Dabo Swinney can't quit talking about you in that coffee bean message." And I spoke to Clemson back in August of 2017. And he said, "Look, the next book I write, I want to call it The Coffee Bean, and I want you to write it with me." He said, "We'll split everything 50-50. How's it sound?" And I mean, I was like, first, I tried to talk him out of it, Chris. I'm like, "John, you don't need me, man. You can do it. You're John Gordon." He said, "Yeah, but God told me to do this. So we're going to do this together." I'm like, "Man, I'm not anybody to get in the way of that." So John and I teamed up, and we wrote the book, The Coffee Bean. It's going to be coming out in June. So what I did as a result of that, I went and read some of John's books, and John's got this talent for putting a message into a simple form and making it something palatable, something you can digest, and something groups can use, teams can use. And I've seen the power of John's message recently with the Power of Positive Summit that he allowed me to be a part of. And so I would say there's a couple of books by John that I've recently read that were really good. I mean, The Energy Bus was a great one. The Power of a Positive Team was another great one. The Carpenter was great. Those are good books that I would suggest to anybody. Anything by John Gordon is something I would put on your to-do read list. There's there's a book that I read in prison. People ask me all the time, because I read a book every other day in prison, Chris. I mean, you have a tremendous amount of time on your hands, and I read everything I get my hands on. And people will ask me the inevitable question, "What is your favorite book that you ever read?" So, you have to have an answer for that. So the best book I've ever read, and it's partly because of the message. I say a lot of it's because of the message, and it's a couple hundred years old. It's The Count of Monte Cristo. You ever read The Count of Monte Cristo?
I have not, no.
Man, I would suggest you get the abridged version. Don't get the unabridged. The unabridged is like it's like 800 pages, but the abridged version is like 400 something pages, and it's by Alexander Dumas. And Alexander Dumas's father was actually in Napoleon's army. I think he was a general for Napoleon. So the book was written in the 1830s, maybe. But it's a great book. But it's the ultimate book on, it's the ultimate book on hate, revenge, redemption, love, finding your way. In the book, this guy is sent to a French prison for something he didn't do. And he sits in this dungeon for, 15, 16 years. And when he gets out, he's got nothing but revenge on his mind. And he slowly, methodically destroys his enemies. But he also realizes in the end that that's consuming him too. It's destroying him. And that kind of hatred will destroy a person. It goes along with saying hate corrodes the container it's contained in. And for such an old book to still be relevant now, it's an amazing story, and it always stuck with me. I read The Count of Monte Cristo several times.
I loved how you just touched on the concept of revenge, and then when he was getting back, it was eventually killing him. It reminds me of one of my all-time favorite quotes by Frank Sinatra, which is, "The best revenge is massive success." And I think that that speaks so purely, because people go out to get revenge, and one of the things we've been spreading out a lot of our Instagram is the concept of, love always trumps hate. And I think what happens is people look to get revenge, and maybe you win something, but the reality is, just like you shared, you eventually, you kill yourself in some ways.
Sure. It takes you through the mud, the process. You can't wrestle with a pig and not get mud on you. So, hate corrodes the container it's contained in. What is this quote that I heard, that a resentment is like you drinking poison and hoping it kills the other person? That and when you have a resentment, you carry that with you. It eats you up. It decays inside you. A resentment, it devours you from the inside. It makes you a bitter person. It makes you the egg. And that's why that's why I've always liked that quote. You drink the poison, but you hope it kills them.
That's awesome. So speaking of quotes, I was curious, do you have an all-time favorite quote?
Yes. So there's a historian named Charles A. Beard. And this guy was asked, he was a history guy. So he's a historian. He was asked one time by somebody, what lessons has history taught you? And he gave the most amazing answer. I'm going to see if I can give it to you off the top of my head. So he said, first, whom the gods would destroy, they must first make mad with power. Next, the mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind incredibly small. The bee fertilizes the flower that it robs, and when it is darkest, you can see the stars. And that's it. That's what he told. So if you dissect everything he's talking about in that quote, it is like, wow, man, you're talking about everything that's ever happened in history. First whom the gods would destroy, they must first make mad with power. Think about the people in the history of the world that, were destroyed, were consumed, and they had this drive for power. You're thinking about the ones, most recently, guys like Hitler and Stalin and people like that. But you go back through the past in history, there's history's littered with people that were mad with this power that they thought they had, and and God destroyed them. And then the mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind incredibly small. It tells you that life is a marathon, man, not a sprint. And it's going to take time for this thing called life to play out. And there's going to be opportunities to do so much throughout that life. And the bee fertilizes the flower that it robs. To me, that says, hey, man, life's about a give and take. You can't be a taker. You have to give back. You have to put back into this thing to take back. The bee doesn't just take, from the flower, it drops something off too, and it pollinates. And then when it is darkest, man, you can see the stars, and that's it. And that's the whole ball game there at the end. Is like, hey, look, in our darkest times, there's going to be hope because you can always go up from there. So to me, that was the best quote I've ever read. It stuck with me for a long time. And I hope I got it right, man. I hope Charles Beard's been dead for a long time, but I hope I did not butcher his quote too bad.
Well, if you did, I'm sure some of his ancestors will come after you, so be careful.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite quote?
I do, and it's interesting. I actually have two, and the reason that No Quit Living is actually named after it is the famous Dr. Norman Vincent Peale quote is it's always too early to quit. I absolutely love that quote. And then my second favorite quote is by Albert Hubbard, which is positive anything is better than negative nothing.
I love it, man. That sounds like an Einstein. It's like Einstein had some great quotes because they were just like, he had a way with words. He was almost like a guy that spoke in parables. He had one that I really liked. Was that genius has its limitations. Unfortunately, stupidity is not thus handicapped. Meaning, you can only be so smart, but you can be as dumb as you want, man. So it was really, but yeah, that L. Ron Hubbard quote is pretty neat, man.
Yeah, Einstein was so far ahead of his time in so many things, and I think some of his quotes, last so long because they were just, like I said, I feel he was so far ahead of time.
Yeah, it's true. And it's I'm just going through my head. It just jarred something. There's another quote I like from Einstein. It's, God does not play dice. So, nothing happens by chance in God's world.
No, that's another great quote. So I'm curious about your answer to this question. If you could go back and assuming the 20-year-old version of yourself would have listened and you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would have it been?
Get help. And here's what I tell people all the time, because look, the numbers say that 10% of us are addicts. We have substance abuse issues of some kind, and that could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be sex, But if 10% of us are addicts and, most people don't ever end up in the rooms of recovery, Chris, I've got a program of recovery today, and that's the best thing I have going for me. The most important thing in my life is my program of recovery, because if I lose recovery, I lose everything else. And if I could go back and talk to a younger self, I would tell that younger version of Damon, get into recovery, get help. You're an alcoholic, you're a drug addict, you're not the best version of yourself. And the only way you're going to get there is through a program of recovery, because a program of recovery was exactly what I needed. But the only way I got there, Chris, was to get sentenced to life in prison. That was my rock bottom moment. You always hear people in addiction talk about the rock bottom. My rock bottom was getting 65 years. And so then I was amenable to change. And I realized that I had been the most selfish, most egotistical, most controlling version of Damon possible. And when I got into recovery, I learned that through the 12 steps, the 12 steps should probably be taught to every first grader in the world, because what it does is it teaches you accountability. It teaches you remorse. It teaches you to go out and make amends whenever you do people wrong. The eighth step of the 12-step program is to make a list of all the people you've harmed, and the ninth step is to go out and make amends whenever you can. I mean, and what a simple concept. And what would the world be like if everybody that harmed somebody immediately said, you know what, I'm sorry for that, and I can do better, and I'm sorry for the way I've done that to you. I mean, it would change the world. But I would tell that 20-year-old self, man, you need to get help. You're an addict, and your life is never going to have any meaning as long as you're an addict, because it's always about you.
No, I love how you touched on the word accountability, and I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke last week, but we have a clothing line, and on the back of everything is #accountability. So I wanted to ask you, Damon, what does accountability mean to you?
Accountability means that you own your actions. There's 4 things that you control in life, and we talked about this before. The 4 things that you control in life are not what a lot of people think they are. The 4 things you control really happen between your ears, and it's the same 4 things I control. And it's what I think, what I say, what I feel, and most importantly, because here's the accountability part, what I do. What I think, what I say, what I feel, what I do. And if it's not one of those 4 things, I really don't control it. So here's the thing, accountability is owning what you do, owning what you say, and owning what you think, and doing something about that, because that's just one part of the process. It's like that old riddle, three frogs are sitting on a log. One of them makes a decision to jump. How many frogs are left on the log? And the answer is 3, because none of them took any action on it. So you can make decisions all day long. You can think things to do all day long, but accountability is taking that action, taking responsibility for the things you do, and go out and do the right thing. And accountability is also your accountability to the universe, your accountability to whatever you feel your God is, your higher power is, because if you're accountable to something higher than yourself, then you're going to be a better version of yourself. I talk about this in my book, and I know we don't want to get off on a lot of this stuff, but I talk about religion and spirituality, and I don't have anything against organized religion. And to be honest, if you want to know my religion, I identify as Catholic. But here's the deal: I am so into spirituality, especially after the time in prison and stuff I learned in prison, because here's the deal. You can be spiritual and not be religious, religious is more of an organized thing, more of a man-made concept, but spirituality is your conscious contact with God. And you can be religious and you can be spiritual and not be religious and still be a good moral character. But the same cannot always be said for someone who is religious without spirituality. Does that make sense?
No, it definitely makes sense. And I think it's an interesting topic that a lot of people, I feel, in 2019 are somewhat anti-religion and different things. And I love how you describe the spirituality, because I think it's important for people to believe their own things. And I think it's important for people not to just take something because someone says and say to themselves, okay, well, I have to believe this. So I'm really intrigued how you touch on that, because I think it's a really interesting perspective. And I think it's okay to believe what you want to believe. I just feel that when people try to sell people on, this is the only way to do it, I think that's where, religion kind of gets a bad rap. But I loved how you touched on the spirituality piece.
Yeah, you totally lose me if you tell me that I have to believe in something because you believe in it, and that's just the way it's going to be. And that's what, in recovery, and now I go to AA meetings. I don't speak for AA. I always have to say that because I don't want the AA people getting upset, because we're not supposed to to try to represent AA, and I don't represent AA. I don't want to represent AA. AA is a great organization with or without me. So, but the guys that started this thing back in the 1930s, Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, they realized that not everybody is Christian, so here's the deal. These guys are both Christians. They want to start this thing and want to try to help people recover from their alcoholism, but we're going to lose 2/3 of the population if we make this a Christian thing. So they opened it up in the 12 steps. You'll see that they always talk about a higher power, and a higher power is your concept of God. And I think that's important, man, because, not everybody believes in the same thing I believe is God. And that's fine. You know what? That's great. If that makes you a better human being, and that makes you go put messages on people's windshields, that makes you go out and positively put back into the stream of life every single day, and you believe something totally different than I believe, then great. Because you know what we both are? We're both spiritual, and we're both trying to make the world a better place. And just because I have a different belief system doesn't mean that I'm right, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong, and it doesn't mean I'm wrong or you're right.
I think it's interesting that you use that verbiage, because that's something that I talk about quite often. Is I think one of the challenges we have as a country is we no longer listen to other people. What we do is we immediately wait for them to stop talking, and then we jump into our argument or our rebuttal. And I think what we need to do is we need to realize that people can have different opinions. So you could be Catholic, you could be a different religion, and your best friend, your neighbor, could be a completely different religion. It doesn't mean, like you said, that you're right or wrong. It just means you have different feelings or different beliefs. But I loved how you touched on is that, but if you still are a good person and you want to pay it forward and do things for other people, it doesn't matter what religion you do believe in or don't believe in.
Absolutely. So if you need a kidney, and I'm not picking on anybody. Let's say that you're a hardcore evangelical Christian, and you think that only only the Christian version of God is the only one, and that, let's say that you think that, if someone doesn't believe in God, that they're believing in the wrong thing. But let's say you need a kidney transplant. And then let's say that there's someone out there that is Muslim, that believes in something. They have a monotheistic religion too, but they believe Allah is God. And you think that person is completely wrong. But if they want to give you their kidney, would you take their kidney? You're absolutely right. You would take their kidney. And that is the most selfless thing someone could do, to give you one of their organs. And what makes them do that? What drives someone to do that? 95% of the world believe in the supreme being, Chris, but not everybody believes in the same supreme being. There's 5 major religions in the history of the world. There's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, there's Judaism, there's Christianity, and there's Islam. And 95% of the world believes in one of those. And I've read every one of their spiritual books when I was in prison: the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Torah, the Bible. I've read them all. And there's 4 spiritual principles that run throughout all those spiritual books. And it's the same 4 spiritual principles I found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And those 4 spiritual principles are what guide all the religions at their core. And those 4 spiritual principles are unselfish, honest, pure, and loving. And what that is a matrix for all the decisions we're supposed to make in life, right? So if I want to do something, Chris, I get up to the line and I say, okay, and I get up to the line. I'm talking like a quarterback now. But if I get to the line of scrimmage and I got a choice to make, I got to make a move. I got to ask myself, Damon, is what you're about to do, is this choice, is the decision you want to make, is this unselfish? Is it honest? Is this pure? And is it loving? And if it's not all 4 of those things, if it doesn't line up, then I need to not do that. I need to really consider what I'm doing. Now, am I a perfect adherent to this, Chris? Absolutely not. I stumble and fall every day. This is the very reason why I don't go around. I'm Catholic, right? We talked about that. It's the very reason why I don't go around quoting scripture anywhere. I don't ever do it. You know why? Because I don't want someone to say, well, one minute he was quoting scripture, the next he was sinning, or the next he was cussing. I'm a human being, man. And I fall short every day. But I get back up and dust myself off and get back in the game. But I'm going to fall short. I'm going to do that. So I'm not going to go around quoting the Bible and quoting scripture and have someone call me out for being a hypocrite.
No, I love that, and I think it's so true. And those questions are awesome, and I definitely wrote them down. It's unselfish, honest, pure, and loving. I think as a country, if we asked ourselves those questions, I think we'd be in a much better place politically, religiously, with sports, and with friends, relationships. So I think that's awesome. Wanted to ask a question. I'm curious to get your answer to it. If you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Boy, that's a good question, Chris. Man, look, man, I can usually fire off answers, but you may have stumped me there. If I could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why? Let's come back to that. Ask me the next question. Let me think about that. Do you mind me thinking about it for a second?
Not at all, man. Not at all. So,
Okay.
So one of the things you spoke about the positive summit with John Gordon is the power of the smile and what it does to the energy. I wanted to just ask you if you wouldn't mind expanding on that for a minute.
So here's the thing that everybody knows, but I don't know if everybody consciously knows it. The cognitive process that goes on is body language. Body language speaks before you open your mouth. You can tell when someone walks in a room by the expression on their face, almost what kind of mood they're in. And when I was in prison is when I learned a lot about body language, because you're living in a dangerous environment in prison, and anything can happen in there. And so here's the deal. You got to learn to read body language because your life may depend on it. So I got really good at reading people's body language. And what I found out is that if I walk into a room with a frown on my face or a look on my face that's neutral, then anything can happen with you interpreting, the energy behind me. But if I walk into a room with a smile on my face and I let you know by my body language that, hey, this guy is positive, two things going to happen. The other positive people in the room are going to gravitate towards that. Guess what the negative people are going to do? They're going to run from that. They're going to get away from that. And that's the thing. You have the power just by the expression on your face to change the energy in the room, but you also have the power to repel the opposite of you, or you have the power to even change a negative person over to a positive. But man, it's just like you said about having too positive of a day. You can't have too positive an outlook, man. You can't have too positive of a disposition. Because, how bad is it to be super positive?
You're speaking to the choir, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So you briefly spoke about the book you're doing with John, and I believe you said it comes out June 12th, correct?
It does. It comes out June 12th. It's available. It's available right now on Amazon.com, just like you can go and get The Change Agent right now on Amazon.com.
Well, you beat me to my next question. Just wanted to, if you wouldn't just briefly... mind just briefly telling our listeners a little bit about The Change Agent, because I just read it and I thought it was awesome.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It humbles me. It blows me away. The whole process of this book, from my literary agent to the publisher to editor, I had two different editors look at it. I kept waiting for someone to say, Damon, you can write okay, but let's bring in a professional writer in. You just don't have the chops for it. But nowhere in the process, Chris, did anybody do that. They all kept saying, man, you've got voice. You can write. Where did you learn? And the publisher was even, where did you learn to write like this? And Chris, I guess it's just from reading so many books. And my dad, too. My dad's a journalist. He was a sports writer for 50 years. He was one of the most well-known journalists here in Texas, sports writer. He's still alive. His name is Bob West. But I think some of that I may have gotten picked up from him. But I think a lot of it is from reading. Reading, we expand our minds. And you can learn how to write from reading a lot. And so... you read the book. Was it easy to follow? Was the literary device I used going back and forth was something that I enjoyed reading in books I read in prison. So I just if I was going to read a book, this is how I would want to read it. So that's how I wrote my book. But the book itself is, it's a book that I think everybody should read. And when I say everybody, I know that's a broad statement, but here's the deal. Addiction affects every single person in this country, whether you are the addict that's out there and you have addiction issues and you're getting high or getting drunk or whatever it is your addiction is, whether you're the addict, whether you're the victim of an addict, because addicts commit a lot of crimes against people to feed their addiction, or you're the family member of an addict. And these are the biggest victims of the addicts is our family members. I put my family through hell, and addicts do, because we're selfish when we're in our addiction. Or you're just a taxpayer paying into an overburdened criminal justice system that has no clue how to handle the disease of addiction, because locking people up for their addiction is not the answer. Addiction affects every single person in this country. And this book is about addiction. And it's about addiction and how it affected me as a person, how it affected my victims, how it affected my family, how it affected society, because now I'm a drain on the system. The taxpayers are paying for me to live in a prison and paying for a trial to put me on trial. So it's a book about addiction. It's a book about redemption. It's a book about hope. I tell people all the time that every man and woman inside the prison systems in America needs to read this book, because it's a blueprint. It's a blueprint for how to turn your life around inside of that institution. But it's not just inside of prison, man, because there's a million different ways to be in prison, Chris. I meet more people outside here in the real world that are locked up. More people are in prison by thoughts than by steel bars. Man, I've met so many more people that are in prison out here by their lives, their choices, their thoughts, by the things they own that own them, really, their material things, than I ever met when I was inside of prison. There's so many more people that are free inside of that prison I was in than out here in the real world. People in prison themselves all the time. But this book is about releasing yourself from incarceration. It gives you the blueprint on how I did it. And I didn't do it alone. I had a ton of help from family. But most importantly, I became amenable to the God, as I understand God, to work with me, man, to make something out of my life, because I had to let go of the steering wheel to do it, man. I had to get over in the passenger seat. It's like those bumper stickers I see on people's cars sometimes, says God is my co-pilot. And I want to honk and let them know, man, you're sitting in the wrong seat. If God, as you know it, is your co-pilot, you're in the wrong seat, brother. You need to be riding. But so this book is about, the rise, the fall, and the audacious comeback of me, of a guy that had it all, threw it all away, and in the darkest, most dangerous place on the planet, went in there and not only survived prison, but thrived in prison, man. And, you don't think of someone going to prison and coming out as the best version of themselves, because it doesn't happen often, but it can. I'm proof that it can. And, we're Americans, Chris. We love a good comeback story. We are the ultimate underdog, man. We are the ultimate underdog from our inception. When we beat the British, man, we weren't even supposed to be here. We did it twice, not once, but twice. We beat these guys when they were far superior to us. So it's in our DNA. We love the Rocky type movie, Chris. We love the guy that goes 12 rounds and gets the crap beat out of him for 12 rounds. But in the last seconds of the 12 rounds, he knocks the other guy out. We love that stuff. That's what this book is, man. This book is a comeback story, of immense proportions. And there's something in there for everybody. The book is about racism and tolerance, too, and tolerance, racism and tolerance, because, you're going to see stories in there about what goes on in the criminal justice system and how a guy handled that, like myself. I went in there as a total outcast, but it's about tolerance. It's about love. It's about hope. It's about finding your way, your moral compass, and where it can take you. And it's about all the things we talked about, servant leadership. All those things are in the book, man. There's way, way more detail of all the things we talked about in that book. But what it was is, it started out as a journal that I kept in prison. And when I got out, I found one of my fraternity brothers that I stayed in touch with. He lives in Manhattan. And he asked me about looking at my journal. So I sent it to him, and he gave it to a buddy of his that's a literary agent. And the literary agent got back in touch with me. He said, "Where's the rest of this book?" And I was like, "Man, it's not a book. It's a journal, He said, "This is a book, man." And so I said, "Look, man, the best chapters haven't been written yet. And when that's done, I'll let you know." And so I figured out when the book was done, Chris, is whenever I became useful again. That was one of the thresholds I had to meet. I had to become a member of society and be useful again. And I did. I found a way to be useful again. I've gone out over 300 times to share my story all over the place, all over the country, really. And who knows how many people it's helped. But I know at the end of the day, it's helped keep me sober, and it's helped make me a better person. And the other part is I had to come full circle on being a human being. And that means I had to come out from a place where there's little love, lots of hate, there's lots of violence, and it's a dangerous environment, prison. I had to come out from that totally negative environment and come full circle into the opposite of fear, which is love. And love, I met this woman a year ago named Kendall Romero. She's got a little daughter named Claire that's 7 now. I have a family. That to me is the success. I think about coming home every day to those two ladies and what I mean to them and my family, the relationships that I've repaired. Success in life is not about your accumulation of wealth or your business acumen or the trophies you can put together or the material things you can rack up. But it's about those relationships we make along the way. And this book is a lot about that, man.
No, I think that's amazing that you touched on all those things, and you talked about hope quite a bit. And it reminds me of a quote that we actually used in one of our past podcasts, which is by Robert H. Schuller, which is, "Let your hopes, not your hurts, shape your future."
Yes, absolutely. That's that is exactly how you should look at life. I like that a lot. Let your hope, not your hurt, shape your future. I'm writing that down right now, actually. Who is that by?
Robert H. Schuller.
Robert H. Schuller. Okay. Robert H. Schuller.
So wanted to ask you before we wrap up here is, what's the best way for our listeners to connect or follow you?
Best way for the listeners to connect or follow me. Okay, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and my handle is at Damon West 7, DamonWest 7. And that's my handle. My website is www.damonwest.org, damonwest.org. And, I'm on Facebook at Damon Joseph West. I'm at that limit now where you can't accept any more friend requests. So I just tell people all the time, follow me. My page is public. You can comment on it, do whatever you want, but I can't accept any more friends. And I guess I'm going to have to go ahead and make another Facebook page, one of those business pages. But, man, it's just another thing to keep up with, man. So I'm not looking forward to that. To answer your question from earlier, too, I don't want to leave this hanging. You asked me about who I would like to have dinner with, right?
Yep.
I think I'm going to go back to Einstein, the guy we were talking about earlier, because he was so advanced for his time. There's some things I would definitely want to ask him about some of the things he saw, how he was able to see things so far out in the future. He's really been one of the most intriguing figures of anybody I've ever read about in the history of the world. And I've been, one of the things about prison is you get a lot of time to read. You were talking about, you've read 30 books this year already?
Yep.
So, which is an amazing feat. And so I got to read a lot in prison. I learned two things about books in prison, Chris. I never saw a guy reading a book get into a fight, and I never saw a fight over a book. So I love books. I mean, books were safe.
I'm sorry to laugh at that. That's an awesome analogy. I think that should be part of Mr. Jackson's story of going to jail, is not only the coffee bean, but also those two facts about fights and books.
Oh yeah, that's it, man. Yeah, Jackson didn't tell me that. I learned that one on my own. I looked around and I was like, man, you know what? No one reading a book has ever got into a fight. So
that's awesome. Now somebody's going to listen to this podcast at some point and walk up to somebody else in prison that's reading a book and just start to fight it, just so you can prove you wrong.
Just punch them. I had some guys in a prison in Louisiana where I was speaking about, and we were, my book. I donated a couple copies of the book to the library, and after I got done, one of the inmates told me, he said, well. He said, you said there's never been a fight over a book. He said, but there's about to be a fight over that book, I promise you. So I was like, we need to get more copies. So
that's awesome. So last question I ask everybody is, I wanted to know if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, here's the deal, man. It's the same parting words I leave for every presentation. I believe, Chris, that all good presentations have a call to action. You have to, man. You have to. You sit there and you talk for 45 minutes or 50 minutes with a group, and then you got to leave them with something. You got to give them an assignment. So my call to action is this for everybody listening to this podcast today. My call to action is you go out there and you go share Mr. Jackson's coffee bean story. But when you share that story about that coffee bean and you talk about that pot of boiling water, don't talk about it being prison, because that's not your pot of boiling water. That's my pot of boiling water. Your pot of boiling water is life. And life, man, you know this. Life turns the heat up on you. I mean, anybody listening to this knows, man, life turns the heat up on you. And, when it does, are we going to be like that carrot and turn soft? We don't want to be, but we have been. Chris, I've been the carrot, and it sucks. Or are we going to be like that egg that turns hard, that lets life turn us hard and callous and miserable to be around? No, man, but I've been there too. I mean, so I've been the carrot, I've been the egg, but tell them about that coffee bean, y'all. Tell them you go out there and you talk about it, and you get excited when you talk about the coffee bean, man, because you tell them about the coffee bean that jumps in the pot of boiling water, changes the whole pot of water to coffee. It tells the water, turn the heat up. I got this. And the longer that coffee bean sits in that pot of boiling water, Chris, the stronger your pot of coffee is going to be. And so I tell everybody everywhere I go, the same thing I'm telling your listeners today is go out there and go be that coffee bean. And change the world with that. If every one of us goes out there and is a coffee bean, the world's a better place. So go out there and go be that coffee bean.
I don't think we could end on a better note than that. So, Damon, I truly appreciate it. And I thank you so much for not only your time and the amazing stuff that you shared on today's episode. And definitely recommend to our listeners not only follow Damon on social media, but get his book that's out and also read his book with John that comes out on June 12th.
Hey, Chris, thanks a lot for having me on, man. Thanks for letting me be useful today. That's what I prayed for this morning when I got up. God put in front of me what you need me to do today for you, and let me recognize when I see it. So I recognize the potential to reach a lot of people today, and thank you for that, Chris.
Thank you for listening to episode number 204. Damon West went through a very tough time in his life, but as he referenced a couple times on today's show, our past does not define us. Damon shared what he believes is a secret to life, serving others and being humble, something that fits absolutely spot on and with our paid forward with positivity mission. Damon discussed the 4 things that we can all control every single day: what we think, say, feel, and what we do. Such simple words, but they are so true. Damon was very clear that our past doesn't define us. Our present is a gift, and that our future is our motivation, what drives us, and our goals. Damon touched upon something that I thought was very insightful: how both our smile and our positive energy can truly impact not only ourselves, but other people as well. So my question to you is just that. How do you enter a room? How do you greet others? Do you smile? Is your greeting open, welcoming, and positive? Or perhaps do you just casually nod and give the very monotone hello? I challenge you today. The next 5 people that you greet, no matter who they are or where you are, greet them with a sincere, welcoming, and a big positive smile. As you go for your greatness today, do so with a giant smile and pay it. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.